Up next, we have Megan O'Donnell from Center for Global Development. She is the Assistant Director of CGD's Gender Program and a Senior Policy Analyst. She leads CGD's COVID-19 Gender and Development Initiative, working on issues related to women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion, gender data and measurement, and development effectiveness. Prior to CGD, O'Donnell worked at the One Campaign, an international advocacy organization focused in sub-Saharan Africa, where she led the development of One's gender and inclusive growth-focused policy recommendations to donors and country governments. Before joining One, she coordinated CGD's gender research program and has also worked with the Inter-American Development Bank, the International Center for Research on Women, CARE USA, Bannon Global, and the Middle East Institute. She has an MPhil from the University of Oxford and a BA from the University of Virginia. Megan, we're so happy to have you. Take it away.
Thank you so much, and hi everyone. You can go straight to the next slide. I'm going to seek to complement what you just heard specific to the Philippines and to Ecuador with the global evidence we've been working to collect and synthesize, not just on adolescent girls, but women and girls writ large. And then we'll dive deeper into impacts on adolescent girls in a moment. So this COVID-19 Gender and Development Initiative that sits at the Center for Global Development is asking three core questions through our work. What is the problem? So what have the gendered impacts of the COVID crisis been? What are donors and policymakers doing in response? Are they paying attention to these gendered impacts? And then what else is needed? What are the gaps to fill? What are recommendations emerging from the answers to those first two questions? We're looking, as you can see on the right, at economic empowerment, so lost jobs, business closures, increases in unpaid care work, doing a deeper dive into social protection, cash transfers, in-kind, food aid, and other types of social support, and the indirect health impacts of the crisis. So a COVID crowd out effect, perhaps, on things like access to contraception, other family planning services, support for gender-based violence survivors, things like that. Next slide, please. And you can go straight into the next one. When it comes to adolescent girls, what we see across a number of country contexts is really consistent with what Tony, Alexandra, and Christelle just mentioned, specific to Ecuador and to the Philippines. We see lost income leading to rising food insecurity, disproportionately impacting women and girls. That's aligned with pre-COVID evidence. We're seeing difficulties, especially for girls, in continuing their education and receiving familial support to get access to the tools and the resources they need to do that. We're seeing a rise in domestic work, unpaid care work, that disproportionately falls on the shoulders of women and girls. That's consistent with pre-COVID realities. And we're seeing struggles, especially of girls, to control resources, any kind of income they are able to generate or save. It's trickier for them to spend or save autonomously, independently, relative to boys. Next slide, please. On the health side, you can go straight through. In some ways, we're seeing a good news story, where depending on the country context, there's been actually a continuation of health services. And depending on the strength of the healthcare system, adolescent girls and older women have been able to continue to seek those services. That said, outcomes are pretty dire, especially for adolescent girls when it comes to maternal mortality. So you can see here, Shikuku et al. In Kenya, reports that while maternal mortality overall has not been severely impacted, among adolescent girls, we see a significant uptick, which definitely warrants policy attention. Next slide, please. Second question, as I mentioned, is what are governments doing in response? You can go straight to the next one. Here we draw on data being collected by the UNDP and UN Women. You can see on the left-hand side here that all measures, again, not specific just to adolescent girls, but across the board, are lacking in gender sensitivity by and large, with the exception of those that are directly focused on addressing violence against women and supporting survivors. When you look at social protection, labor market measures, economic, fiscal, and financial measures, less than 20% of those have addressed gender or considered gender-specific constraints. On the right, we did a deeper dive into the measures that do mention adolescent girls. These exclusively fall within the realms of violence and social protection. So no labor market measures, economic, fiscal, or financial measures are accounting for adolescent girls' specific needs or constraints, though we recognize that in a lot of lower income settings, they are, of course, employed, participating in economies. And so that's a major gap to fill. Next slide, please. This gives you a more granular, a more specific breakdown of those policy measures that you saw on the last slide. So on the left, you can see the breakdown by income level of countries. This is something that we're seeing fairly consistently across the board, that where measures are gender sensitive, and in this case, where they do pay specific attention to adolescent girls, they're concentrated in higher income countries. So most of the measures you see reflected come from high or upper middle income countries. Far fewer are coming from lower middle income or low income settings. On the right, you can see the specific policy areas that are being focused on. So the first four, again, as I mentioned, are focused on violence against women, supporting survivors, and it is encouraging, I should say, that they are paying specific attention to adolescent girls in some countries. As we just heard from other panelists, this is hugely needed. And then the last two columns you can see fall into the social protection realm. So this is about ensuring that cash transfers reach and benefit girls, and also making sure that school feeding programs are benefiting them. Next slide.
Quick reminder here, Megan, we're kind of tight on time. Wrap it up
Yep.
in a minute. Would be great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I'll be even less. So here I won't go into detail for each of these bullet points, but just to highlight two core buckets of the recommendations that we've made in light of our research findings. The first is that we definitely need to fill data gaps around this population. We do need more comprehensive cross-country evidence on how adolescent girls are being impacted by the crisis, but that we shouldn't wait for those data gaps to close before we act. There are already solid evidence-based recommendations we should act on, including things like strengthening the care economy or ensuring that sexual and reproductive health services are categorized as essential in the wake of pandemics. So I'll end there, pass back to the Choco team. Thank you all.